do a quick video on some of the testing that I've had done within the past few months while trying to find a diagnosis for what was going on. So starting in January, like I've mentioned before, I ended up in the ER for what turned out to be a CSF leak. But in trying to get diagnosed with that, I had just some like normal procedural tests like a spinal tap and like a CT scan and MRI. So just kind of those normal tests. But moving further down the road, the tests have gotten a little bit more unique, I'd say, and some of them I hadn't done or heard of before. So I thought I would kind of give some information on that because I remember when I heard of some of them, I was like, I don't know what that is, what's going on. So after I had a diagnosed CSF leak, they can go in and do a blind blood patch where they just like take your blood and inject it back into your spine in hopes that it will find where the leak is and seal it. So they did that, but I didn't feel all the way healed. So kind of the next step is doing a not blind blood patch so they can do what's called a CT myelogram. So for the myelogram, it's a little bit different than like an MRI or a regular CT. So they will inject the dye directly into your spine. So it will kind of illuminate and light up the different like nerve roots and parts of your spinal cord and spinal column. So again, not super fun to have needles stuck in your back. They did like numb it a little bit and then they injected the dye, and then they have you, if they inject the dye, they need to kind of move all throughout your spine. So I know some places have a machine, like a table they'll put you on where they can like tilt you so the dye travels. The hospital I had it done at did not, so we did like a poor man's version of it where they just had me like stand up and like roll and like do like weird yoga positions to try and get the dye to move all around. So then after that injection, they'll do like the normal CT and it just kind of shows them a different view because the dye is directly in your spine. And that's hopeful to be like another step to light up where the leak is. After that, I had a massive pressure headache, which is interesting because I was there for the pressure headaches. So to get one from the test to solve the pressure headache is frustrating. Also, this was done to figure out where my CSF leak was, but by putting the needle in my spine, it again could cause a leak. So a lot to kind of weigh when you're looking at that test. But that test showed us a good bit about like what my spinal column was looking like and about some of the nerve roots. So that was the CT myelogram that I had done for the CSF leak. And then I had a skull to tailbone MRI done, which, an MRI is pretty standard, but this one was about 3 hours long. I did all 3 sections, so cervical, lumbar, thoracic. We did them all at once in one go. So I couldn't, for 3 hours, I laid flat on the MRI table, which was pretty challenging. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but to not move for 3 hours is really hard. And then because of my EDS, my joints pop out really easily. So from like laying on the hard table, like my shoulder would pop out of place. And then since it was out of place, it would put my elbow at a weird angle, so my elbow would like pop out. So I actually have talked to an radiologist since then, and they said they don't recommend doing more than 2 MRIs in a day, kind of because of that. It just gets a little bit too long. But that MRI was beyond helpful. It's what showed my Chiari. It showed the condition of some of my discs and my vertebrae. It showed a lot of really great information. So I'm very thankful that I had that test done. I mean, that's kind of the precipice of finding everything that's been going on. So then after that MRI, and when we found the Chiari, there are a couple other tests for Chiari that I requested to have done. but I was being seen by a not Chiari specialist, which is not advisable. If you have Chiari, you cannot go to a neurosurgeon, you cannot go to a neurologist, you have to go to someone who specializes in Chiari. So because I knew that, I ignored the advice of those doctors and sought out a specialist. So that specialist sent me for the tests I had been asking for. So I did an upright MRI. It's a kind of like a new up and coming maybe test. I know some doctors don't really believe in the validity of it, and some don't like them because the imaging is not of a great quality. But luckily there's one in my area, so I was able to go do that. So, you know, a normal MRI machine is kind of that tube where you lay in. This was took up half of a room. It was just this massive like block white machine, and then there's a little bench kind of in the middle that you sat on. So it was weight bearing, so it kind of show you the situation with, you know, your Chiari and your spine and your neck when the weight from gravity is on it. So yeah, I sat and the test I had done was to do an flexion and extension MRI. So I had the neck brace off, but like how far forward you can bend your neck and then how far backward, and you had to hold them for the test. So I thought the test would kind of be a breeze, but it was actually very challenging because of my POTS. Sitting, being upright is pretty hard. Usually standing's the worst, but with sitting, I tend to like kind of slouch over like this to, it helps with the blood flow, makes me feel like I'm not going to pass out. So sitting up straight makes it really challenging for the blood to feel like it's getting to my head and my heart. Like even sitting like this right now, I feel like I'm going to faint. So that's why I keep kind of like bending over. So I had to sit up completely straight and couldn't move, and you're not super locked in. They had something that like locked my head in here, and then there was like a bar like down here, but you know there's lots of room to move, and you know how hard it is to be still when you're not supposed to be moving. So that test was probably only like 30 minutes total, and the max I had to hold a position was like 3 or 4 minutes, I think. Holding, you know, the downward movement and the backward movement were pretty hard to hold for as long, because you need to move absolutely as far as you can to show what your neck looks like when it's moving in those directions. And I felt like I was going to faint, but all in all, it was a good test, and it showed what my vertebrae are doing with weight being on them. Another test I had done was a rotational CT scan. CT is, you know, very common. I've had probably 1 million of them done, but this one, I had to go to a specific location that was actually 2 hours from my house to do it, and it was very basic, like had me lay on the table, and then they had me rotate my neck to a specific place, like side to side, so kind of showing what that motion looks like on the imaging, which was really helpful in the diagnosis with CCI and AAI. It showed that when I'm like turning my head side to side, my C1 and C2 are basically dislocating. So that test was very, very useful and very easy. Like there was no dye, no contrast. I didn't even have to put a hospital gown on, so very easy test. And another test I had done was a micronutrient panel. So my doctor requested a full blood work panel, which, you know, is pretty common to have done at just a regular physical, but it wasn't that panel. It was specific micronutrients to kind of show, you know, a lot of people with EDS have nutrient vitamin deficiencies. So it would test for a lot of those different things to kind of see if there's anything nutrition and diet wise we could be doing to help my overall health. So he goes through a biotech firm in California, and so they sent me a kit to my house that was like a box to ship it in, like an insulated box, freezer packs, and it sent the tubing and packaging, the vials, everything I needed. So it was a little bit tricky because there weren't great directions. I ended up looking them up online and going to a locations page. I found none within like a couple hours of my house, so I contacted the closest one, and it wasn't even a location. It was a mobile phlebotomist who did withdrawals for them. So I went to it was like a holistic health store where she worked out of, and she did the withdrawal. She was great. Because my POTS and stuff, I faint really easily. Like, I don't have a problem with needles anymore. I've had enough needles to be fine with them, but just because of POTS and stuff, like, I faint, and I had to fast for some of the tests. So to have driven a couple hours without eating and then have a blood draw, like, I knew I would pass out. And so she asked me, and I was like, I'm really sorry, but I'll probably faint. She was like, do you want to lay down? Which was amazing. I did great. She had really cool band-aids afterwards. So yeah, that test was pretty easy. They also sent in the kit a list of all the tests I needed, and it showed the tech like exactly what vials and exactly, you know, like what they had to do with them after. Like, some needed to be immediately iced, some needed to go into a centrifuge, some needed to be shaken this many times. So I'm still waiting on the results back from that, but I will post an update with how that went. So yeah, that was through a company called Vibrant America, if you were interested in looking them up. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a little background on some of the tests I've had done within the past few months that have been unique. So maybe if somebody else is having them done, they can know a little bit about what to look forward to or what's in store for them. So I'd love to hear your experiences if you've had the upright MRI or any kind of the other tests that are a little bit less often prescribed. So thanks so much for listening.